Have you ever met someone who truly believed that happiness was a lie? I have. That person was my mother. She believed joy only made people weak, and that her mission was to train me by strangling any spark of light that appeared in my life. Sounds insane, doesn't it? But to her, it was the truth of life. And that was the beginning of a childhood where I was only allowed to exist through numbers. This is the story of the mood logs that turned my childhood into a prison. The mood log system begins. I still remember the first time my mother handed me two leather notebooks and a laminated rating chart. She placed them on the table as if they were some kind of special gift. We're going to track our emotions every hour, she said, her tone so serious, I thought it was something as important as signing a contract. I hadn't even grasped what she meant when she pointed to the chart, which went from 1 to 10. Every hour, you have to write down how you're feeling. At the end of the day, we'll compare. And remember, you are never allowed to be happier than me. If I'm at a 3, then you're only allowed to be at a 3 or lower. I was a teenager back then, and I had just watched my father walk out of the house for another woman. Deep down, I actually felt a bit relieved. No more endless fights. So when my mother told me to write down my first number in the notebook, I foolishly put down a 6. A 6, because that day I felt lighter than usual. The result was a burning slap across my face. I froze, not even understanding what I had done wrong, when my mother screamed, "How dare you be twice as happy as the mother who sacrificed everything for you?" That night, I went to bed with an empty, aching stomach. It was my first punishment, just for daring to feel better than her. From that day on, the mood log became the supreme law of the house. Every morning, my mother would wake up, rate her own mood, usually a 2 or a 3, and then hide that number away like a predator laying a trap. I, like some clueless prey, would write mine into the notebook, trembling, never sure if I had just committed the sin of being happier than her. If I was lucky enough to guess right and wrote a number equal to or lower than hers, breakfast would be served. But the moment I dared to go even one level higher, everything was canceled. Outings, forbidden books, thrown away, sometimes even my most treasured belongings destroyed right in front of me. That was when I understood from now on, my emotions no longer belonged to me. They were part of a sick competition, and the only rule was this: I was not allowed to be happy. Chapter 2. The Spiral of Control. At first, I thought if I just kept writing down low numbers, everything would be fine. I tried writing one every day, thinking that would surely be safe. But my mother quickly noticed. She stared at me and said, "You want to know what it really feels like to live at level 1? I'll show you." Then she dragged me down into the pitch-dark basement and left me there for hours, surrounded by dampness and biting cold. I remember her voice echoing down the stairs there. That's what a true one feels like. I shook, uncontrollably terrified, horrified at how she could turn anything into a cruel game. From that point on, I was forced to learn how to read my mother's moods, as if my life depended on it. The dark circles under her eyes meant it was a 3 kind of day, so I had to write 2. If the weather was nice, her mood might creep up to a 4, giving me the leeway to write 3. But nothing was ever certain, because the smallest thing, like a traffic ticket, would make her plummet to a 1 and then rush home to check what I had written in the notebook. This twisted game of comparing emotions slowly became an invisible chain. I no longer had the right to enjoy any kind of joy. Even laughing with friends made her look at me as though I had just committed a crime. She often muttered her favorite saying, "Children who are too happy too soon will grow up broken." So instead of giving me a childhood, she decided to destroy it at the root. She declined every invitation from relatives, afraid that happy settings would throw me off the mood scale. She turned down good jobs, cut off friendships, all to keep herself and me trapped in the same swamp of misery. Before long, our lives shrank into nothing more than a string of meaningless numbers. I wrote numbers to survive. She used numbers to punish. And slowly, we were both dragged into a spiral that only my mother had the audacity to call the truth of life. Chapter 3. The Rebellion of Zero. At some point, I realized I could never win this game. Laugh and I'd be punished. Cry and there was no mercy. Smile and I'd get slapped. Frown and I'd be dragged to the bottom. No matter what number I wrote, my mother always found a way to twist it into an excuse for control. So I decided to try something different. If she wanted me to suffer, I'd give her something worse than suffering. That day, instead of writing a 1 or a 2, I wrote down a 0. And next to it, I added 0 because I wish I could disappear. When she saw it, she froze. She shouted that 0 wasn't on the scale, but I calmly replied, "Then think about it. You're the reason I feel this way." From that day on, every hour I wrote 0. Not 1, not 2, an absolute 0. Each one paired with heavier words. 0 because I can't remember the last time I laughed for real. 0 because I wish you would stop existing. My mother began to panic. She raised her own numbers to 4, 5, even 6, as if she was opening the door for me to be happier. But I stubbornly stayed at 0. She screamed in my face that I had to be happy after years of drilling into me that happiness was dangerous. That contradiction slowly drove her insane. One day, she tried buying me gifts, cooking my favorite meals, even hugging me while saying sweet words she had never said before. I still coldly opened the notebook and wrote 0. She shrieked, "Can't you see I'm trying?" But the more she screamed, the more empty zeros I filled in. And that was the moment I realized I had found the only weapon that could make her powerless. Not arguing, not begging, but absolute emptiness. I turned myself into a 0, and for the first time, she had no way left to control me. Chapter 4, when my mother began to escalate, my zeros were like needles stabbing into my mother's pride. At first she begged, then she switched tactics, buying gifts, cooking meals, cleaning the house, even hugging and kissing me, whispering such sweet words that for a moment I thought she had turned into a different mother. But when I opened the notebook, I still wrote down a 0. She started screaming that I was deliberately ruining everything. And then one day, I saw her pull out a razor blade and slice long cuts into her arm right in front of me. She trembled, her eyes bloodshot, and asked me, "How about now? Do you see what real pain feels like? Still going to write 0?" I looked straight at her, then wrote 0 because you're doing this to yourself. I had never seen such despair in her eyes before, but she didn't stop. She bought a puppy, convinced that I couldn't possibly stay cold in the face of something so adorable. I still fed it, walked it, took care of it properly, and then quietly wrote down another 0. When gifts, affection, and even a pet failed, my mother turned to our relatives and my friends. She called everyone, inviting family members over. I sat in front of aunts and uncles, listening to them tell stories about their happy families, looking at the smiling photos they showed me. I nodded, smiled politely, and when they left, I wrote another 0. She even tracked down some of my old friends, forcing them to visit with photo albums and souvenirs. They didn't know what to do except stare at me, sitting motionless like a statue. When they left, my mother raged, breaking things, sobbing, screaming in a house reeking of failure. It was then I realized she was willing to destroy everything, even herself, just to drag me out of my zeros. But what she never understood was that she was the one who had created them. And I had already decided I would rather die with my zeros than ever again hand her the power to decide whether I was allowed to be happy. Chapter 5, 10 and 0. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, flipping open the familiar notebook. The endless line of zeros stretched out like a row of gravestones. My mother looked more broken than ever, her hair clumped into greasy strands, her arms covered in half-healed scars, her eyes red and swollen, as if she had cried all night. She snatched my notebook from me, flipping through the pages, her hands trembling at the endless trail of zeros. Then she opened her own notebook and scribbled furiously. When she shoved it toward me, I saw she had written a massive 10 circled again and again as if trying to carve it into the paper. She smiled, but it was a twisted, terrifying smile. See, I'm perfectly happy now. Do you see I've won? I picked up my pen, said nothing, and wrote down another 0. The kitchen sank into suffocating silence. Then suddenly she grabbed the pen from me and scrawled across my notebook 789, filling the entire page with frantic fake numbers, the scribbles messy like a ransom note. I looked at them calmly, crossed them all out, and once again wrote a single 0. That was when she screamed, flipping the entire table, sending dishes crashing to the floor in a storm of shattered glass. Shards cut into her hands, blood dripping, but she still knelt, frantically picking up the pieces, scrubbing in a frenzy. I just stood there watching, before silently walking back to my room. The next morning, she came out with her hands wrapped in white bandages. She placed her notebook in front of me. For the first time, she hadn't written any number from 1 to 10. Instead, there was only a single mark, 10. Beneath it, a jagged line of words, because I destroyed my own daughter. I stared at the sentence, then picked up my pen, wrote down another 0 in my own notebook, and added a line beneath it. Because you really did. This time, there were no screams, no smashing, only a thick, suffocating silence, like the two of us had finally fallen into the deepest pit together. Chapter 6. The Departure. The next morning, I heard strange noises in the house, not the usual screaming or smashing. This time, it was the sound of drawers being pulled open, the clatter of a suitcase, the rustle of clothes shoved hastily into bags. I stepped into the hallway and saw my mother standing in the living room with a large suitcase. She didn't look at me. She just moved silently back and forth between rooms, gathering her things. I sat at the kitchen table, my notebook still open in front of me, watching in silence. By noon, the house, once cramped with her clutter, suddenly felt eerily empty. The shelves that had always been crammed full now gaped with hollow spaces. The dog followed her anxiously from room to room, barking in confusion, not understanding what was happening. Then she stopped at the door, her hand gripping the keys. Before stepping out, she placed a stack of notebooks on the table, all of her mood logs, along with the old laminated rating chart. She left them behind like a distorted will, or perhaps a silent confession. We looked at each other one last time. I saw her lips twitch as if she wanted to say something, but instead, she turned away, slammed the door, and disappeared. The sound of her car engine roared, then faded into the distance, leaving a silence so heavy I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock. The dog collapsed onto the carpet, whimpering softly, its eyes fixed on the door that would never open again. I sat there for a long time, staring at the pile of notebooks she had left behind. Numbers scrawled chaotically, lies upon lies, proof of a life consumed by the obsession of measuring happiness. And amid that chaos, my notebook lay quietly still, filled with nothing but an endless chain of zeros. In that moment, I realized she may have left, but her toxic legacy remained. And the only thing left for me to decide was whether I would stay trapped in it or finally begin to learn how to exist on my own terms. Chapter 7. The First Ray of Light. After my mother left, the house was strangely quiet. No more shouting, no more drawn-out sobbing, no more battles over meaningless numbers. It was just me, the dog, and an empty space. At first, the silence made me restless. I still instinctively reached for the notebook to log a number every hour, then froze, realizing I didn't have to anymore. Freedom had always been what I longed for, but when it finally came, I found myself afraid. In those early days, all I knew how to do was clean. I gathered up all the gifts my mother had forced on me, the useless healing tools, and the stacks of her old mood logs, and threw them all away. Slowly, the house felt lighter, as if it too wanted to breathe. Ms. Sebastian, the teacher I used to linger around after school, just to avoid going home, was the first to call. She brought groceries, then sat with me at the table to sort through the unpaid bills my mother had left behind. She didn't ask too many questions, she just helped me work through them one by one. It was the first time I felt an adult was truly on my side, not to control me, but to support me. My aunt came by too. She was stunned when she saw the pile of mood logs my mother had abandoned. She flipped through them, her expression growing heavier as she realized how obsession had consumed her sister's entire life and had nearly swallowed my childhood whole. She offered to let me move in with her, but I refused. This house, haunted as it was still the only place where I felt I had even a shred of control, so I built a new routine for myself. Wake up in the morning, feed, the dog go to school, come home to silence. No comparisons, no check-ins, no punishments for daring to smile. And then one evening I laughed out loud at an old movie clip. No one was there to scold me. No slap was waiting for me. It was just me and my own laughter. Small, but truly free. For the first time in years, I felt it clearly, maybe. I would be okay. Chapter 8, When I Learned to Feel Again. It was my aunt who arranged for me to see a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Unlike the fake therapy sessions of the past, this time I went alone. No one sat beside me to correct my words. No one hovered next to me monitoring my every breath. In the first session, I barely spoke. I just sat there, arms crossed, still clinging to the habits of defense. I was used to silence, used to emotions being nothing but traps for others to exploit. But instead of pushing me, the therapist simply said, gently, "Here you don't need to write numbers. You don't need to report anything. You only need to exist." I didn't know how to respond, so I stayed silent. But something in those words made me break down. I didn't mean to, yet the tears came anyway. And for the first time, I wasn't punished for crying. I wasn't forced to turn it into a number. I wasn't compared to anyone else. In the sessions that followed, I began to talk. Not everything at once, but piece by piece. About the fear of hearing my mother's footsteps in the hallway. About the slaps when I dared to write higher than her. About the nights I dreamed of disappearing and felt relieved in the dream. Each time I spoke, it felt like peeling off another layer of iron armor I had worn for years. The zeros had once saved me, once been my shield against her. But now I understood they were also a prison. They had protected me from pain, but they had also trapped me in numbness. One day, the therapist asked if you had to write a number. Now, what would it be? I hesitated. My hand trembled slightly because in my head I could still hear my mother's voice. Any number higher than mine is a sin. But then slowly, I said, maybe. A 1. Because at least today I laughed once. Hearing myself say it out loud made me choke up. It was both fragile and powerful, the realization that I didn't have to be 0 forever, that I was allowed to touch other numbers, that I was allowed to feel. It was just a first step, small but real, and it was mine. Chapter 9, Reconnecting. After months of therapy, I began to realize I was no longer afraid of my own laughter. I was still cautious, but at least it no longer meant a slap, and that created space, just enough space for me to try allowing myself to reconnect with others. Sarah, one of my old friends, reached out to me through Ms. Sebastian. At first I planned to decline, but for some reason, I said yes. We arranged to meet at a small cafe. I sat, waiting, my heart pounding, as if I were heading into battle. When Sarah walked in, clutching her drink, my eyes dropped to the table, bracing myself for whatever might come. But she only smiled and said, "I missed you." Just 4 words, simple, unscripted, without pressure. I looked up and saw nothing but sincerity in her eyes. And for the first time, I felt safe enough to respond, "I missed you too." We talked for hours. About school, about the years that had slipped away, about the times she tried to stay in touch, but my mother cut her off. I shared part of my story, not all of it, just enough so she would understand why I had disappeared. Sarah didn't push for more, and she didn't pity me. She simply nodded, then told me stories of our old memories, the silly things we did as kids. I laughed softly but genuinely. After that, I began meeting other friends again. Some were awkward, some were still a little angry that I had vanished without a word. But over time, I saw it clearly these connections, however fragile, were real. And I didn't need to write down a number to prove their worth. At home, I slowly learned to enjoy small things too, cooking a proper meal, playing music, while cleaning, goofing around with the dog, who had now grown up. Each little moment felt like sunlight slipping through a crack in the door, warming a room that had been shut tight for too long. I was no longer an absolute zero, but I wasn't ready to leap to a 10 either. All I knew was that for the first time in years, I could feel something without fear of being punished for it. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 10, 18 and Free. My 18th birthday came with no cake, no fake parties filled with pressure like before. I simply sat alone in the now tidy house, the dog curled up on the corner of the sofa, the evening sun streaming through the window. And I realized I didn't need anything more than this. I thought back to the previous birthday when my mother knelt, begging me to fake happiness in front of the relatives. I remembered the pitying looks, the forced singing, and the feeling that the entire world was waiting for me to show some expression to reassure them. This year, no one waited for me to smile. No one forced me to log my emotions. Freedom, I discovered, was this quiet. Later, with my aunt and Ms. Sebastian, I completed the legal procedures. I was officially recognized as independent someone with the right to decide everything in my own life. That court document was more than just a legal paper. It was a confirmation that the chain of control had truly ended. I still remember walking out of the courthouse when my aunt broke down in tears. She hugged me tightly and told me I was stronger than anyone she had ever known. I didn't cry, but inside, I felt immense gratitude. Without her, without Ms. Sebastian, I would never have had the chance to rewrite the rest of my life. I enrolled in a community college, starting with small classes, step by step. No one tore up my acceptance letters. No one stood in my way. I could finally choose my own path, no matter how slow or unconventional it might be. That night, I sat alone and reopened the old mood logs. Pages filled with zeros, the evidence of a dark time. But instead of heaviness, I saw them now like an old suit of armor, once protective, but no longer needed. I had survived. I was free. My mother had taught me that happiness was dangerous, that it would always lead to disappointment. But now I understood disappointment didn't kill me. What almost destroyed me was being stripped of the right to be happy. And now, having reclaimed that right, fragile as it was, I felt stronger than ever. On my 18th birthday, I didn't wish for anything grand. I simply thought to myself, from now on, every emotion belongs to me and me alone. Chapter 11, When I Stopped Counting. I've often asked myself if I had to write one more number in a mood log, what would it be? After all those years of nothing but zeros, would I ever dare to write something else? But then I realized I don't have to write anything at all. No one hovers over me anymore, demanding hourly reports of whether I'm happy or sad. No one punishes me if I dare to smile, or tears apart my joy just because they can't stand it. Those notebooks now sit neatly in a box tucked in the corner of my closet. I keep them not to trap myself in the past, but to remind myself I survived. I learned how to turn emptiness into armor, how to transform zeros into weapons that kept me alive. And now that I no longer need to fight, I can finally lay that armor down. I'm learning to get used to ordinary things. Waking up in the morning, brewing a hot cup of coffee, walking the dog around the neighborhood. Spending an afternoon studying in the library without fearing I'll be called home to report my emotions. Laughing at an old movie at night without feeling guilty. To others, maybe these are just ordinary things, but to me they are miracles, because they are mine. Not numbers, not logs, not twisted comparisons. simply mine. My mother once taught me that happiness was dangerous, but the truth is happiness isn't dangerous. Control is dangerous. Deprivation is dangerous. And the most dangerous thing of all is turning love into a shackle. I don't know if my mother will ever understand that. I don't know if she'll ever come back. But I do know one thing for certain. I'm no longer the child trembling in front of an emotion chart. I am myself. And for the first time in my life, I don't need any number to prove my existence. I don't need to count anymore. I just need to live. Looking back, I understand that my mother didn't just ruin my childhood, she ruined herself. She thought she was protecting me from pain. But in the end, she became the very nightmare I had to survive. The zeros once served as my armor, but now I don't need them anymore. I have the right to feel, to laugh, to be happy without reporting it to anyone. And maybe the biggest lesson in all of this is simple love should never be used as a tool of control. So if someone ever tells you that happiness is dangerous, remember this: the real danger is being denied the right to feel anything at all.